Some people say that when you grow up surrounded by beauty and privilege, you become immune to wonder. I disagree. For me, the endless glass walls of our house on the Malibu cliffs only magnified my hunger for more sky. More world, more risk. Every evening, as the sun set and painted the Pacific in gold and rose, I would press my forehead to the cool window and watch the waves crash hundreds of feet below. The city lights of Los Angeles glittered in the distance, promising possibility, but after a while, even possibility started to taste bland. My name is Lila Davenport. My father, Michael, runs a tech empire from skyscrapers in New York, San Francisco, and Berlin. My mother, Isabella, was born in Florence and can talk about art for hours in 3 different languages. Our home was a gallery reel Picassos and Monets hung beside framed sketches I drew as a child. There was always a sense of abundance. Designer dresses I never wore hung in rows. The kitchen overflowed with fresh flowers, and the garage housed cars whose engines I never bothered to learn. It sounds ungrateful to say that comfort can be a kind of prison, but anyone who's lived it will know exactly what I mean. What no one ever tells you is that money can buy you almost anything except the feeling of being brave. I wanted stories of my own, something raw and unscripted. So, in the summer I turned 23, I sat on the sun-drenched balcony of our Malibu house and decided to chase adventure before adulthood pulled me under its tide of expectations. I wanted more than luxury. I wanted to be tested. I wanted to be uncomfortable and maybe a little bit afraid. It didn't take long for a plan to form. Over brunch in Santa Monica, I told my 3 closest friends what I wanted. Not Europe, not another shopping spree in Paris or a private yacht in the Bahamas, but something wild and unpredictable. Charlotte Sinclair was the first to say yes. She's English with a quick mind and a mischievous streak. She'd grown up between London and the Cotswolds, and unlike the rest of us, she never worried about breaking the rules. "As long as there's gin and a little danger," she said, "count me in." Vanessa Brooks was a harder sell. She's the kind of girl who brings her satin pillowcase to 5-star hotels because she's convinced the sheets everywhere else will give her hives. But she was craving change too, and maybe some bragging rights for her Instagram followers. Lucas Wright, my neighbor since childhood, was all enthusiastic. He was the brother I never had, fiercely loyal and always game for anything, especially if he thought I might get in over my head. That night we met at my place and planned our escape, toes in the pool and wine glasses in hand. We scrolled through options. Antarctica was too cold, the Amazon too obvious. Then we saw a photo of a jungle in Central Africa, deep green, impossibly dense, threaded with silver rivers. I felt a spark in my chest. "That's it," I said. "Let's go where nobody we know has ever been." Within a week, I'd wired $50,000 to an adventure travel company based in New York. The company promised a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Private flights, expert guides, luxury tents with real beds, and a team of rangers certified to deal with any situation. The itinerary was pure fantasy: helicopter tours, river rafting, and night safaris. I threw in another $10,000 for insurance, which I later realized was more of a bribe for the local officials than any actual policy. When you have that kind of money, people don't ask questions, they just say yes. We packed light, but I insisted on one extravagance: my favorite pair of leather boots, custom made in Milan. If I was going to hike through the jungle, I'd do it in style, even if my mother shook her head at me as I zipped up my bag. She pressed a gold locket into my hand at the airport. "For luck," she said softly, "and call me every day." My father offered his usual advice: "Trust your instincts, Lila, but don't trust anyone else." I hugged them both, promised to stay safe, and tried not to show how much my hands were shaking. The flight from Los Angeles to New York was easy, but as our private jet took off for Nairobi, the world I knew started to slip away. Outside the window, clouds drifted past, endless and white, and I tried to imagine what Africa would smell like. I wondered if the stars would look different from another hemisphere, if the air would feel heavier in my lungs. I tried to ignore the gnawing worry in my gut, the feeling that we were about to cross some invisible line, after which nothing would ever be the same. We landed in Nairobi at dawn. The airport was loud, chaotic, and filled with scents I couldn't name. Our next flight was on a plane so small I could touch both walls from my seat. The pilot was named James. He wore sunglasses and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. As we lifted off into the haze, the city vanished behind us, replaced by endless stretches of green and brown. Lucas leaned over to me and whispered, "This is crazy, right?" I smiled back, heart pounding, and said, "Exactly." After what felt like hours, we landed on a dirt runway surrounded by nothing but jungle. Our guides Emmanuel and Joseph, two locals who spoke perfect English, greeted us with nervous smiles. They loaded our bags onto battered jeeps and told us the rules. Stay close. Don't wander at night. If you hear anything strange, don't run. I laughed, thinking it was all part of the adventure. I'd spent over $60,000 before even stepping foot in the jungle. But as we drove into the trees and the sunlight disappeared beneath the green, I realized money meant nothing here. Not my boots, not my designer sunglasses, not the stack of dollars in my backpack, none of it could protect me from what waited in the shadows. We were four friends at the edge of the world, chasing a story we thought we could control. I didn't know it yet, but we were about to become part of something wild and ancient, something that would change us forever. If I'd known what waited for us, maybe I would have stayed in Malibu. But then again, maybe not. Some stories, once they begin, won't let you turn back. The first 2 days felt like the adventure of a lifetime. It was the kind of trip you see on magazine covers or in glamorous travel vlogs, only I was living it, breathing it, with every sense electrified. Our guides, Emmanuel and Joseph, led us through the lush labyrinth of the jungle. Every step was a reminder of just how far I was from Malibu's manicured lawns. Here, everything was wild and uncontained. The air was thick and almost heavy, humid enough that sweat dripped down my back within minutes of hiking. It was nothing like the dry, salty air at home. All around us, insects sang constant, shrill and beautiful in their untamed way. Birds flashed brilliant blue and yellow overhead. I remember Charlotte calling out each new animal she spotted, her British accent carrying through the trees. "There, look! Giraffes." We stopped to watch them, so much taller in real life than in any zoo, their necks swinging gently as they nibbled leaves from the canopy above. Vanessa, in her oversized sunglasses and ridiculous mosquito net hat, took endless photos. "I look like a beekeeper," she complained, but she kept snapping away, probably already composing captions for her next Instagram post. Lucas joked and made faces, trying to distract Vanessa from her ever-growing list of anxieties. "Do you think they have Wi-Fi out here?" He teased, knowing full well her answer would be a dramatic groan. But none of us could deny the awe. At one point, we watched a line of elephants lumbering across a shallow river, their calves stumbling after them, splashing in the water. I stood perfectly still and let the scene soak into my memory, knowing that no amount of money could ever recreate this kind of wonder. We spent our days exploring, following game trails that wove beneath ancient trees and twisted vines. Emmanuel pointed out tracks and scat evidence of leopards, hyenas, and creatures I'd only seen in documentaries. "This is an old place," he said, voice low and reverent. "Older than anything you can imagine." His words gave me goosebumps, and not just from excitement. At night, we returned to camp, a neat circle of heavy canvas tents, the fire at its center warding off the worst of the jungle's darkness. Joseph cooked simple but delicious meals: grilled fish, root vegetables, spiced rice. We drank bottled water and told stories under the stars. The sky was impossibly wide, the Milky Way blazing above like a trail of diamonds. For those first few nights, I felt invincible and touchable in the best sense. I fell asleep each night with a smile on my lips and a wild hope that this adventure would last forever. But on the third night, everything changed. I woke to a strange noise, rustling, heavy and deliberate, not the random flutter of birds or monkeys. My heart began to pound. For a moment, I stayed frozen, listening. Then I heard Emmanuel's voice outside, low but urgent. "Stay in your tents," he called. "No lights." But Charlotte, brave, unzipped her tent anyway. I was only seconds behind her. She held a flashlight, its beam trembling in her hand, casting erratic shadows across the foliage. Vanessa huddled beside me, wide-eyed, clutching my arm so tightly it hurt. Lucas, ever the skeptic, was half out of his tent, trying to peer into the darkness. Then we saw a movement in the ferns, a dark serpentine shape that glided rather than walked. I thought it must be a crocodile, though we were far from any water. Vanessa whispered, "It's just a log," but her voice quivered. Lucas joked, "The world's biggest worm," and forced a laugh. But the shape kept coming, slow and deliberate. When Emmanuel shone his flashlight, the beam landed on a massive snake, longer than our tent, thick as a man's torso. Its head rose, tongue flicking, unblinking eyes catching the light. Before I could scream, I saw something else. A claw, enormous and hooked, scraped at the earth behind the snake. A tail, muscular and ridged, swaying in the shadows. And then Jaw's teeth glinting, so many teeth that my mind refused to process what I was seeing. It stood there, half hidden in the darkness, hunched and impossibly tall. For a moment the jungle was silent, every living thing holding its breath. The creature regarded us, yellow eyes reflecting the firelight, and I was suddenly cold all over. Charlotte, never one to stay silent, breathed, "A dinosaur." The words sounded ridiculous, and yet, as it left her mouth, it rang true. I could see the shape, the posture, something ancient, something wrong. I laughed, too nervous, high-pitched, because what else could I do? Dinosaurs aren't real. They haven't walked this earth in millions of years. But this one was real. It watched us. Its tail swept through the ferns. The snake slithered away as if it too recognized something older, more dangerous than itself. Joseph appeared beside us, clutching a machete. Emmanuel raised his voice, yelling and banging a pot. The creature hesitated, eyes narrowed, and then melted back into the shadows. We scrambled back to our tents, heartbeats thundering in our ears. I barely slept that night. Every snap of a twig, every sigh of wind became a threat. In the darkness, my mind played tricks. I imagined claws scraping the fabric of my tent, imagined teeth closing around my legs. For the first time, I felt truly helpless. At dawn, the jungle was eerily quiet. Vanessa looked pale, her hands shaking as she packed her bag. Lucas pretended to be brave, but I saw the way his eyes darted into every shadow. Charlotte tried to make a joke about British explorers meeting their end, but even she couldn't hide her fear. Then we noticed Emmanuel was missing. His tent stood open, the sleeping bag still warm. Joseph called out, searching the edges of the camp. We found Emmanuel's hat 100 yards away, torn and stained with blood. Panic set in, hard and fast. We huddled together, clutching our useless phones, no signal, no GPS, nothing but empty hope. The jungle pressed in on all sides, suddenly more alive, more dangerous than before. It was as if something ancient had woken up and was watching us, waiting. All at once, the adventure felt like a trap. The thrill was gone. All that remained was fear and the cold, hard truth that no amount of money, planning, or privilege could save us from what was out there. And deep down I realized that the real story was only just beginning. Fear has a way of sharpening the senses, turning every color brighter, every sound louder. That next morning, as we stood in the ruined campsite with the sun filtering in pale shafts through the tangled canopy, I realized I'd never been so awake in my life. The loss of Emmanuel, the quiet strength of our guides, left us all shaken. For the first time, the four of us were truly alone, or at least as alone as anyone could feel when they were being watched by something ancient and hungry. It didn't take long for us to decide we couldn't stay. Joseph, his eyes wide and haunted, wanted to search for Emmanuel. But Charlotte argued that staying in one place made us sitting ducks. "That thing knows we're here," she whispered, voice trembling. "We need to keep moving." The air seemed thicker, the shadows deeper, as if the very jungle was pressing in on us, eager to see what we would do next. Our plan was simple: follow the river. Joseph said if we kept close to the water and moved east, we'd eventually reach a ranger station. There, he promised, we could call for help if the radios were working, if the rangers were even there. The river was our only hope, a silver thread winding through the chaos. And so we packed what we could carry: a few bottles of water, some protein bars, 2 flashlights, my gold locket, and a knife that felt laughably small compared to the teeth we'd seen last night. We set out, hacking through dense undergrowth, ducking under low branches, shoes slipping in the mud. I tried not to look back, but I couldn't help glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. Vanessa kept close to me, her breathing ragged, hands shaking as she swatted away biting insects. Lucas tried to keep everyone's spirits up, making jokes that landed like stones in water, but I could see fear lurking behind his smile. Charlotte, ever the explorer, led the way, her face set with grim determination. The river was no comfort. Its banks were slick and treacherous, and every splash in the water made us jump. Sometimes, in the murky depths, I imagined I saw shapes long, dark bodies sliding beneath the surface. The jungle was alive with noise, the cries of monkeys, the drone of insects. And sometimes, beneath it all, a low rumble that made my skin crawl. We walked for hours, every step feeling heavier than the last. My designer boots, once a symbol of my old life, were caked in mud and nearly useless. My hair was tangled, and my skin was scratched and raw from thorns. I caught myself wishing for a hot bath, clean sheets, and my mother's gentle hands, but those luxuries felt as far away as the stars. Here, all that mattered was survival. The first night away from camp, we made a shelter from branches and palm fronds, huddling together for warmth. None of us slept. The jungle came alive after dark, and every rustle, every far-off roar, set our hearts racing. At one point, I climbed a tree hoping for safety and a better view. The moonlight spilled through the leaves, illuminating the river in ghostly silver. I saw a ripple in the water, then a huge, shadowy form sliding out onto the bank, a dinosaur, unmistakable, moving with terrible grace. Its tail swept the earth and its head swung from side to side, tasting the air. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't look up. The creature prowled for a while, then slipped back into the undergrowth. When I finally climbed down, my legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. In the days that followed, the jungle seemed to close in around us, becoming a living maze. The heat was relentless, sweat dripping into my eyes, blurring my vision. We tried to ration our food, but it ran out quickly. The protein bars were gone within 2 days. After that, we drank rainwater collected in cupped leaves and chewed bitter plants that Joseph claimed were safe. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but fear kept me moving. We tried to stay quiet, but sometimes it didn't matter. Once we heard a deep, guttural roar that echoed through the trees, vibrating in our bones. It sounded almost like a voice language twisted into something primal. Charlotte muttered, "It's talking to us." And for a moment I believed her. The dinosaurs were hunting us, intelligent in their monstrous way. We lost Joseph on the 3rd day. He'd fallen behind, searching for a path through a tangle of vines. When we heard him cry out a single, desperate scream that was cut off too soon, we ran back, but all we found was his flashlight, crushed and smeared with blood. There were claw marks in the mud, long and deep, trailing off into the shadows. After that, panic set in. Charlotte tried to keep us moving, but there was a wildness in her eyes I'd never seen before. Lucas became quieter, his jokes drying up, replaced by grim silence. Vanessa clung to me, sometimes sobbing quietly, sometimes whispering prayers under her breath. On the 4th night, we lost Charlotte. One moment she was behind me, telling a story about her childhood in the Cotswolds to keep our spirits up. The next, she was gone. We searched frantically, calling her name, but all we found were claw marks in the earth, and a single, muddy shoe. It was just the 3 of us now, and the jungle felt even bigger, more menacing. Vanessa and I started sleeping in the trees, lashing ourselves to branches so we wouldn't fall. We took turns keeping watch, though exhaustion made our eyelids heavy. Sometimes, through the leaves, I'd see huge shadows moving below reptilian shapes, their scales glinting in the moonlight, eyes cold and yellow. I found $200 crumpled in my backpack one night, and I laughed until I nearly cried. What good was money here, in a place where monsters ruled? Back in Malibu, that cash would buy me lunch at my favorite cafe, a manicure, and a new book. Here, it was nothing but paper. We grew weaker. The jungle seemed to sense it, pressing in closer, testing us. On the 4th night, as I dozed fitfully on my branch, I heard Vanessa scream. I scrambled down, tearing my hands on the bark, but I was too late. The forest floor was torn up, and she was gone. I found her scarf caught on a branch, torn and spattered with blood. Suddenly, I was alone. The fear was a living thing now, cold and heavy in my chest. I looked up at the stars, barely visible through the tangled canopy, and wondered if anyone was searching for us. If anyone would ever know what happened here, in this forgotten corner of the world where the past still walked and hunted. But I was not ready to give up, not yet. I was a Davenport, and somewhere, deep inside, I still had a spark of hope. I would survive. I would escape this nightmare. And I would make sure that someone, somewhere, heard the truth about what lurked in the jungles of Africa. They say that when you are truly terrified, you discover what you are capable of. In the jungle, alone and hunted, I learned truths about myself that I never would have believed in Malibu or Manhattan. I became something else entirely, a creature of instinct, cunning, and desperation. All the things that once defined me, the money, the comfort, the security of my old life vanished, replaced by a single need: survive. The night Vanessa disappeared, I spent hours trembling in the crook of a tree, clutching a broken branch as a makeshift weapon. I could hear the soft thuds and rustles of movement below, sometimes a distant roar that chilled my blood. My mind spun with grief, guilt, and dread, but eventually fatigue won. I dozed fitfully, waking with every new sound, never sure if it was morning or night. When the sun rose, pale and weak, I could barely move. My body was exhausted and covered in cuts, my clothes torn and caked with mud. My hair felt like a rope, tangled with twigs and leaves. For a moment, I almost let despair take me. But then I remembered my mother's locket still warm against my skin. My father's words echoing in my mind: "Trust your instincts, Lila, but don't trust anyone else." That morning I smeared myself with mud, rubbing it over my arms, legs, and even my face. I'd read somewhere that it might mask my scent, and in this nightmare world, anything that gave me hope was worth trying. I moved through the jungle at dawn, when the creatures seemed less alert, and again at dusk, hugging the shadows, using every trick my desperate mind could imagine. Days passed, though I lost count of how many. Hunger became my companion, a hollow ache that gnawed at my insides. I learned to eat what I could find: sour berries, crunchy insects, the flesh of fruit picked from low branches. I drank rainwater pooled in leaves or trickling from rocks. I stopped thinking about home, luxury, or what my friends back in America would say if they could see me now. I became a shadow, slipping from tree to tree, always listening, always afraid. One afternoon, driven by a strange sense of hope or madness, I followed the sound of water through a thicket of ferns. There, behind a curtain of vines and a veil of mist, I found a waterfall tumbling into a crystal-clear pool. The sight was so shockingly beautiful that I almost forgot to be afraid. I crept closer, and that's when I saw the cave hidden behind the roaring water, dark and deep. It felt like a sanctuary. I slipped behind the waterfall, soaked to the skin, and entered the cool darkness. The cave was dry and safe from the outside world, large enough to move around, but small enough to feel protected. I made it my home for several days, emerging only to scavenge for food and water. At night, I listened to the jungle, wrote on scraps of paper torn from my battered diary, and whispered letters to my parents. I apologized for every careless word, every argument, every time I doubted their love. In that silence, I made a promise to survive, not just for myself, but for all the friends I'd lost. For my family waiting thousands of miles away, and maybe, in some small way, for Emmanuel, Joseph, Charlotte, Lucas, and Vanessa. I would not let their memories vanish in this ancient, merciless jungle. One morning, after a night of torrential rain, I noticed footprints by the water's edge, strange, clawed prints that chilled my blood. Something massive had been near my cave, perhaps even searching for me. The knowledge spurred me to move, to keep going, even as my body screamed for rest. The next day, stumbling through thick undergrowth, I nearly missed it, a glint of metal among the trees. I forced my aching body toward it and found an overgrown trail marked by an old rusted sign. My heart leaped. I followed the path, hope rising with each step until I reached a small crumbling building half hidden by vines. The faded letters on the wall read, "Ranger Station." Inside, the station was a time capsule, maps curled with age, an overturned cot, empty cans, and a thick layer of dust on everything. But there, on a battered desk, was a radio, old, dented, but possibly salvageable. My hands shook as I inspected it. The wires were frayed, and the battery was almost dead, but years of tinkering with gadgets in my father's garage came back to me. I tore up the floorboards looking for anything that might help and found a second radio, just as old, but with a nearly intact battery. I spliced wires, tightened connections, and prayed with every breath that I could make it work. I don't know how long I worked. Time became a blur of frustration, fear, and fierce determination. Just when I was ready to give up, a burst of static erupted from the speaker. I fumbled for the microphone and pressed the button, my voice raw from days of silence. "This is Leela Davenport," I croaked, barely recognizing myself. "I need help. I'm lost in the jungle. Please, please help me." For a long moment, nothing but static answered. Then, through the crackling noise, I heard a voice calm, American, impossibly clear. "We copy, Leela. Hold your position. Rescue team inbound." I wept, no sobs, no drama, just a shudder that shook me from head to toe. Relief poured through me like sunlight after a storm. I spent the next hours, maybe days, dozing fitfully on the cot, listening to the radio, afraid that if I blinked, it would all turn out to be a dream. But the voice returned again and again, assuring me they were coming. The day the helicopter arrived, the jungle was quiet. I heard the distant thrum of blades, the crack of branches, and then, through the clearing, a rush of wind and a blaze of sunlight. I staggered outside, waving my arms, thin and filthy, covered in mud and old wounds. The rescuers looked at me with wide, startled eyes. One even gasped, "How are you alive?" I wanted to laugh and cry all at once. They lifted me into the helicopter, wrapped me in a blanket, and gave me water and gentle words. As the helicopter soared above the trees, I looked down one last time. The jungle seemed to close behind me, silent, eternal, keeping its secrets. I knew I'd never come back, and I knew that part of me would always remain, lost among the shadows. When I finally returned home, I never told the whole story. No one would have believed it anyway. They'd say it was fever, trauma, or a mind broken by fear. But I know what I saw. I know what's still out there, waiting. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the echo of those ancient roars in my dreams. And I remind myself that some adventures are best left untold. But I lived. And sometimes that's all that matters.